Hazard.
In around 1919, the world experienced a pandemic known as the Spanish flu. Those living in isolated rural villages were hit the hardest, with little access to doctors, hospitals, or any meaningful medical care. A young mother in the Romanian countryside named Miranda has just buried her daughter of 10 years old, died a victim of the pandemic. In a deep state of grief, she then wanders to a nearby cave after the burial, preparing to end her own life. In this cave, she discovers an odd growth of an ancient fungal mold, which fascinates her, and like a dumbass, she touches the mold with her bare hands. Her mind was instantly flooded with the accumulated past memories and consciousnesses of hundreds of people that the fungus had absorbed over centuries. From there, she made it her mission to use the mold to revive her daughter. She would then return to the nearby village and infect villagers with the mold, which also cured them of their illnesses. She built a cult around herself, to which they called her Mother Miranda. For decades, she would perform experiments underground and in caves with the mold and residents from the village. Then in the 1950s, she had come across a travelling hiker who had become lost, injured, and stranded. Miranda would rescue him and helped him recover, and became his mentor once he saw she ran a biology lab. Here she'd show him the mold and its ability to mutate, assimilate, and replicate life forms, which inspired him a means to achieve evolutionist goals. But they held very different worldviews. She just wanted to resurrect her daughter, but he wanted to change the world. After seeing that the mold wasn't infectious enough to use for his vision, he wanted to try creating something that would be everything he needed. He would return to university and team up with his best friends Marcus and Edward to create a eugenics company to fulfill his vision. He would take inspiration from the crest of the four lords that he saw during his time in the village and use it for his new company. This man was named Oswell Spencer, and the company they would create would be called Umbrella. Now that Spencer was gone, Miranda could finally resume her own research. She wanted only one thing: a body capable of bringing Eva, her daughter, back. For decades, she continued experimenting beneath the village. Eventually, Miranda made her greatest breakthrough: the Cardo. Spencer left the village a different man. He became convinced human evolution was possible, but it also revealed one major problem: it couldn't spread the way he wanted. Miranda's experiments only worked under very specific conditions. If Spencer wanted to reshape humanity, he needed something far more infectious, something that could be engineered, something science could control. So he returned to England. There, he reunited with two old friends, James Marcus, a brilliant virologist whose obsession with biology rivaled Spencer's own, and Edward Ashford, the heir to the prestigious Ashford family, whose wealth and scientific influence made almost any research project possible. Although the three men shared the same ambition, their motivations couldn't have been more different. Marcus wanted a scientific discovery. Ashford wanted to restore his family's legacy, while Spencer wanted to play God. In 1966, the three men organised an expedition deep into West Africa. Their destination was an isolated region once ruled by an ancient civilization known as the Ndipaya Kingdom. For centuries, local legends spoke of a mysterious flower capable of granting incredible powers. The villagers called it the Stairway to the Sun. The expedition eventually located the ruins. Hidden beneath the African wilderness, they found exactly what they had been searching for. The flower was real, and inside it was something even more extraordinary: a primitive virus unlike anything modern science had ever encountered. The Progenitor Virus represented a completely different path toward evolution. It possessed the ability to rewrite living organisms at the genetic level. Unfortunately, it also had an unfortunate habit of killing almost everyone it infected. But Spencer didn't see failure. He saw potential. If they could tame the virus, it could become the foundation for a new species. Returning from Africa, the three scientists established what appeared to be an ordinary pharmaceutical company. In 1968, Umbrella Pharmaceuticals was officially born. To the public, Umbrella developed medicines, vaccines, and medical equipment, a trusted company dedicated to improving human health. But behind closed doors, deep beneath its laboratories, researchers began experimenting with one question: how do you turn a virus that kills almost everyone into one that creates superhumans instead? Umbrella wanted a secret laboratory. It had to be isolated and hidden from the public. Most importantly, capable of housing dangerous biological experiments. Spencer had a land beneath the mountains, but building a secret laboratory beneath the mountains wasn't easy. To make Spencer's vision a reality, Umbrella hired one of the finest architects in America. His name was George Trevor. Trevor had spent years designing luxurious mansions and intricate buildings, secret passageways, hidden rooms, underground tunnels. the kind of architecture that could hide almost anything. To George, the Spencer mansion was simply another prestigious commission. He had no idea what it was really being built for. Construction took years. Every hallway, every staircase, every hidden mechanism had been carefully designed by Trevor himself. By the time the mansion was complete, Spencer finally had exactly what he needed: a luxurious estate above ground, and beneath it is one of the largest secret biological laboratories in the world. But there was one last problem. George Trevor knew too much, and Spencer couldn't allow anyone outside Umbrella to possess that knowledge. So Spencer came up with a solution. He invited George back to the mansion. Not alone though, he invited his entire family, his wife Jessica, and their young daughter Lisa. At first everything appeared normal. They toured the mansion, enjoyed Spencer's hospitality, but the invitation had never been genuine. It was a trap. George Trevor was quietly imprisoned inside the very mansion he had designed. With every hidden corridor sealed and every escape route blocked, he wandered through the endless halls, desperately searching for a way out. The irony was cruel. No one understood the mansion better than George Trevor, yet no one would ever escape it. Days turned into weeks. Weeks became months. Eventually, George Trevor died alone inside the walls of his own masterpiece. But his suffering wasn't the worst part, because Umbrella had far more sinister plans for his wife and his daughter. Jessica Trevor was separated from Lisa almost immediately. Jessica died early in the experiments, as her body could not handle the virus. Lisa, however, became one of Umbrella's earliest human test subjects. At the time, researchers were still desperately searching for a way to create a stable host for the Progenitor Virus. Most subjects died within hours. Some survived for days, but none lasted very long. Lisa was different. Every virus they injected into her, she survived. The Progenitor Virus, experimental strains, countless prototypes, one after another. Her body refused to die. Years passed, then decades. Lisa continued mutating. Her bones stretched beyond recognition. Her muscles hardened. Her skin became scarred and twisted beyond anything human. She had become effectively immortal, but immortality came with a terrible cost. Her memories slowly disappeared with her humanity. Everything except one memory: her mother. Even after decades of experimentation, Lisa never stopped searching for Jessica. Whenever Umbrella researchers entered her cell, Lisa attacked them, not out of hatred, but because she believed one of them might be her mother. She would tear the faces from her victims trying to wear them herself, hoping that she was holding on to her real mother. It's one of the most disturbing stories in Resident Evil because Lisa never chose any of it. She wasn't a scientist, she wasn't a soldier, she was simply a little girl whose family made the mistake of trusting Oswell Spencer. By the late 1970s, Umbrella had learned something remarkable from Lisa. Her body possessed an extraordinary compatibility with viruses. The data collected from decades of experiments would directly influence future research into the Tyrant program. Countless biological weapons, including some of Umbrella's greatest creations, would owe their existence to the suffering of a single child. For Spencer, Lisa Trevor was a major success. For everyone else, she was proof that Umbrella had crossed a line it could never come back from. And while Lisa remained hidden beneath the Spencer mansion, another ambitious scientist was quietly making a breakthrough that would change the world forever. His name was William Birkin. By the late 1970s, thousands of scientists were working on a single objective: to create the perfect life form. Leading much of this research was Dr. James Marcus. Among Umbrella's three founders, Marcus was arguably the greatest biologist of them all. To him, viruses weren't weapons. They were the next step in human evolution. For years, Marcus continued experimenting with the Progenitor Virus. Unfortunately, the virus had one major flaw: it was simply too deadly. Most subjects died almost immediately. For Spencer, this was unacceptable. He didn't want random mutations that he can't control. One day, while studying, he noticed an ordinary leech inside his laboratory. That gave him an idea. Leeches possessed an extraordinary ability to adapt. They could absorb blood from different hosts, survive extreme environments, and regenerate damaged tissue. Marcus wondered what would happen if ordinary leeches' DNA was combined with that of the Progenitor Virus. The result: the Tyrant virus, or simply known as the T-virus. Compared to the Progenitor Virus, it spread much more easily and infected almost every form of life: humans, dogs, birds, plants, even insects. But easier transmission came with terrifying side effects. Most infected humans lost all higher brain function. Their bodies continued moving as their humanity disappeared, driven only by instinct. These creatures would eventually become known as zombies. For the first time, Umbrella realized that it had accidentally created something far more dangerous than a medicine. It had created an outbreak. Fortunately for the company, they had no intention of releasing it into the public. Instead, they saw another opportunity. Military contracts. Imagine selling government soldiers that never felt fear. That idea quickly evolved into a new project, the Bioorganic Weapons Program, or simply known as BOWs. Unlike ordinary zombies, these creatures would be engineered from the ground up, stronger, faster, smarter, designed specifically for combat. The first attempts were disastrous. Some mutations became too aggressive, others died before reaching maturity. Many simply couldn't follow commands. But Umbrella wasn't discouraged. Failure simply meant collecting more data. Unfortunately for them, they had an endless supply of test subjects, death row inmates, kidnapped civilians, even their own employees. Over time, the monsters became more sophisticated. Every failure brought Umbrella one step closer to the perfect biological weapon. Fortunately, two brilliant young researchers had recently joined Umbrella. One possessed extraordinary intelligence, the other possessed limitless ambition. Their names were William Birkin and Albert Wesker. At first glance, they appeared to be Marcus's brightest students. He personally mentored them and shared his research. Marcus fully believed he was training the next generation of scientists, but he had no idea he was training the two men who would eventually destroy everything he had built. By the late 1980s, James Marcus had become one of the most important people inside Umbrella. The T-virus was his creation, and the company's greatest scientific breakthroughs all traced back to his research. But without Marcus, there would be no bioorganic weapons, no tyrants, and no Umbrella. But success can be dangerous, especially when you work for Oswell Spencer. Spencer had never wanted partners. He wanted followers. To him, Umbrella wasn't built by three equals. It was built to fulfill his own selfish vision. Spencer reached a decision that Marcus had to disappear. But Spencer wouldn't dirty his own hands. Instead, he turned to the two young scientists Marcus trusted most, William Birkin and Albert Wesker. One night in 1988, in Umbrella's executive training school. As Marcus works in his laboratory, Special Forces unit came in and opened fire, killing him instantly. The hit was carried out by Birkin and Wesker. After decades of loyalty, Umbrella rewarded one of its founders with a bullet. To make sure there was no evidence, his body was dumped into the facility's sewer system. Spencer believed the problem had been solved. Marcus was dead. Umbrella could continue without him. Except Marcus had spent years conducting one final experiment almost nobody knew about. For decades, he had studied leeches and their strange ability to imitate life itself. Before his death, Marcus injected experimental leeches with the T-virus. The creatures absorbed his genetic material, his memories, even fragments of his personality. As Marcus's body drifted through the flooded tunnels beneath the training school, the infected leeches surrounded him. Slowly, they consumed him. Months passed, then years. Something extraordinary began happening beneath the abandoned facility. The leeches didn't simply eat Marcus. They rebuilt him into something else entirely. A creature that believed it was James Marcus. It spoke like Marcus, remembered Marcus's life, and carried only one purpose: revenge. It blamed Umbrella for everything. Spencer, Birkin, Wesker. Every one of them would pay. The company's first founder had quietly become its newest bioorganic weapon. He was waiting for the perfect moment to destroy the company that had betrayed him. With James Marcus gone, Umbrella's brightest scientist was now Dr. William Birkin. Unlike Marcus, Birkin wasn't interested in proving scientific theories. He wanted to create perfection. His work eventually brought him to one subject unlike any other: Lisa Trevor. For nearly 30 years, Lisa had endured countless experiments. The Progenitor Virus, the T-virus, and dozens of failed prototypes, yet somehow she refused to die. Birkin couldn't understand it. The more Birkin studied Lisa, the more he realized something extraordinary. The Progenitor Virus inside her had continued evolving for decades, becoming something entirely new. Birkin isolated the organism after years of research, and he finally gave it a name: the G-virus. Unlike the T-virus, the G-virus wasn't designed to create obedient soldiers. A host infected with the G-virus didn't simply mutate. It continued evolving again and again and again. Every injury, every threat, and every challenge, the virus responded by creating a stronger life form. To Birkin, this was the next stage of human evolution. Spencer disagreed. He believed the G-virus was far too unpredictable. A biological weapon that couldn't be controlled was useless. But Birkin had become obsessed. He no longer wanted to work for Umbrella. He wanted complete control over his own research. So he secretly began negotiating with the United States military. If the government purchased the G-virus, Birkin would become one of the most important scientists in the world. Unfortunately, Umbrella found out. And Umbrella didn't tolerate betrayal. September 22nd, deep beneath Raccoon City, William Birkin prepared to leave Umbrella forever. Hidden inside a secure laboratory, sat the only known samples of the G virus. Before the deal could happen, Umbrella Security Service agents stormed the facility. Their orders were simple: recover the virus and eliminate Birkin. Leading the operation was a Special Forces soldier known only by his codename, Hunk. If you've played the games, you already know what that means. Birkin refused to surrender. The soldiers opened fire. Within seconds, one of Umbrella's greatest scientists lay dying on the laboratory floor. The team recovered the virus samples. Mission accomplished. Or so they thought. Barely alive, Birkin dragged himself across the floor toward a single remaining vial, the last sample of the G virus. Most people would probably use it as evidence or destroy it. Birkin injected it directly into his own body. Almost immediately, the virus began taking over. Bones snapped, muscles expanded, organs regenerated. The dying scientist William Birkin had become patient zero. Moments later, the newly transformed Birkin attacked the Umbrella soldiers. One by one, they were torn apart. As the surviving operatives attempted to escape, one of them accidentally dropped a case containing stolen T-virus samples. The glass shattered as the virus seeped into the drainage system, from there into Raccoon City's sewer network. Nobody noticed. Life in Raccoon City continued as normal, completely unaware that beneath their feet, one of the deadliest outbreaks in human history had already begun, and somewhere else in the Arklay Mountains. Another nightmare was preparing to awaken, because the man Spencer believed he had killed 10 years earlier had finally returned. James Marcus. By the summer of 1998, something strange was happening in the forests surrounding Raccoon City. At first, it was only a few missing hikers. Then campers disappeared. Then entire families stopped returning home. When search parties finally located the bodies, they realised the victims weren't simply dead. Many had been partially eaten. Wild animal attacks were common in the Arklay Mountains, but this was different. Witnesses claimed they had seen enormous dogs wandering through the forest. Others spoke of strange, human-like creatures moving through the trees at night. With the number of disappearances continuing to rise, the city deployed its elite tactical unit, STARS, Special Tactics and Rescue Service. Unlike ordinary police officers, STARS specialised in high-risk operations, hostage rescues, counter-terrorism, and even search and recovery. The team was divided into two units, Bravo Team and Alpha Team. Bravo Team was sent into the mountains first. Among its members were Rebecca Chambers, the youngest member of STARS, a gifted medic and far more intelligent than most people gave her credit for. Alongside her was veteran pilot Edward Dewey, Kenneth Sullivan, Richard Aiken, Forrest Spire, and the team's commanding officer, Captain Enrico. Their mission sounded simple: locate the missing civilians, investigate the murders and return home. But instead, everything went wrong before they even landed. While flying over the mountains, Bravo Team's helicopter suddenly suffered engine failure. Forced to make an emergency landing, the team found themselves stranded deep inside the forest. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured. Not far from the crash site, Rebecca discovered an overturned military transport vehicle. Inside, every soldier was dead except one: the escaped prisoner, Billy Cohen, a former Marine sentenced to death after allegedly murdering 23 civilians during a military operation. Naturally, the police assumed Billy was responsible for the killings in the mountains. Rebecca wasn't so sure. The bodies she had just examined didn't look like victims of a gunfight. They looked eaten. Following the investigation, Rebecca stumbled across something even stranger. A luxury passenger train stopped in the middle of nowhere. The Ecliptic Express with its doors stood open, and its lights were still on. But inside, every passenger appeared dead. Moments after the bodies began moving, the dead had somehow come back to life. At first, Rebecca assumed she was hallucinating, but the creatures kept coming. This wasn't a disease anyone had ever seen before. It was the T-virus. Although Rebecca didn't know that yet, she only knew one thing: if she wanted to survive, she would need help. That help came from the last person she expected, Billy Cohen. Despite being fugitives on opposite sides of the law, the two formed an uneasy alliance, not because they trusted each other, but because they had no other choice. As the train derailed, Rebecca and Billy escaped into a nearby abandoned research complex. At first glance, it looked like an old university. In reality, it had once served as Umbrella's executive training school, the very place where James Marcus had been murdered 10 years earlier. Although abandoned on the surface, something had awakened beneath it: the Queen Leech. The organism that had absorbed Marcus's memories had finally completed its transformation, believing itself to truly be James Marcus. It had spent years preparing its revenge. Now, it unleashed the T-virus throughout Umbrella's forgotten laboratories. The outbreak spreading across the Arklay Mountains wasn't an accident. It was revenge. Ironically, however, the first victims weren't Umbrella executives. They were ordinary civilians, the families who had simply wandered into the wrong forest. Over the next several hours, Rebecca witnessed horrors no police academy could have prepared her for. mutated insects, gigantic centipedes, monstrous apes, hunter prototypes, and the horrifying results of Umbrella's early virus experiments. For the first time, she saw the company's true purpose. Umbrella was manufacturing monsters. Eventually, Rebecca and Billy confronted the creature calling itself James Marcus. Marcus revealed Umbrella's betrayal, Spencer's ambition, and the truth behind the T-virus. But revenge wasn't enough. Marcus wanted to wipe Umbrella from existence. After a brutal battle, Rebecca and Billy finally destroyed Green Leech. The founder of Umbrella had fallen again. As dawn approached, Rebecca believed the nightmare was finally over. Billy disappeared into the forest as Rebecca chose to report him as dead, giving him a chance to start a new life. It was a small act of compassion after everything they had survived together. But Rebecca had no time to rest. A radio transmission suddenly came through. Alpha Team had arrived. Their mission was to locate Bravo Team. Rebecca looked toward the mountains. Not far away, she could see a massive mansion standing silently above the forest. She had no idea that she was walking straight into Umbrella's greatest secret. July 24, 1998, Alpha Team arrived in the Arklay Mountains to find Bravo Team. The helicopter touched down just before sunset. Inside were some of Raccoon City's finest officers. Chris Redfield, a former Air Force pilot known for his incredible marksmanship and unwavering determination. Jill Valentine, a former Delta Force operative and one of the team's experts in lockpicking and explosives. Barry Burton, a weapons specialist with years of combat experience. Joseph Frost, the team scout, and leading the operation, Captain Albert Wesker. To everyone else, he was the calm, dependable leader of STARS. Only Wesker knew the truth. This mission had never been about rescuing Bravo Team. It was another experiment. Alpha Team hadn't been on the ground for long before Joseph volunteered to scout ahead. Within moments, his radio transmission turned into terrified screaming. The team rushed toward the sound. They found Joseph surrounded by enormous dogs, Doberman dogs infected with the T-virus. Before anyone could react, Joseph was torn apart. The surviving members opened fire. The creatures scattered into the forest. Then, their helicopter suddenly lifted off. The pilot, Brad Vickers, panicked. Believing everyone else was already dead, he abandoned them, stranded, surrounded by monsters, with nowhere else to run. The team spotted a nearby mansion. They barricaded themselves inside. At first, the mansion looked almost peaceful. Grand staircases, elegant paintings, luxury furniture. It felt less like a laboratory and more like the home of an eccentric millionaire. But the illusion didn't last long as a gunshot echoed somewhere inside. Chris and Jill split up to investigate. Moments later, they discovered the mansion's first resident, a man kneeling over a corpse, eating it slowly. As the creature turned around, its pale eyes stared directly at them. It was a zombie, the first one either of them had ever seen, and certainly not the last. As the team searched for one another, the mansion slowly revealed its true purpose. Everything George Trevor had designed decades earlier, it had been built to hide Umbrella. Throughout the mansion, the survivors encountered horrors unlike anything imaginable. Giant spiders, mutated snakes, hunters engineered for combat, living plants capable of devouring humans. Every room contained another failed experiment. And somewhere beneath it all, one victim had survived longer than anyone else, Lisa Trevor. After the Arklay outbreak consumed the laboratory, there was nobody left to keep her imprisoned. The researchers were dead. The underground facility had fallen into chaos. For the first time in decades, Lisa was free. She wandered endlessly through the caves, tunnels, and hidden laboratories beneath the mansion searching for her mother. As Chris and Jill explored the mansion's underground altar, they discovered the remains of Jessica Trevor. Her bones had been hidden away for decades. Lisa arrived as she immediately recognized her mother by scent. After more than 30 years of searching, she had finally found the only person she had ever wanted to see again. Lisa gently cradled her mother's skull in her arms. Then, with one final cry, she threw herself into the abyss below, choosing to remain with her mother. A little girl who had endured decades of unimaginable suffering finally found peace. In many ways, Lisa wasn't the mansion's greatest monster. She was its greatest victim. As Chris and Jill uncovered more of Umbrella's laboratories, pieces of the truth finally came together. The mansion was a research facility. The monsters had been engineered, and someone inside STARS had known all along. That someone was Albert Wesker. For years, Wesker had secretly worked for Umbrella. His assignment had been simple: lead STARS into the mansion and observe how ordinary humans performed against Umbrella's bioorganic weapons, collect combat data, and eliminate any survivors. The entire rescue mission had been a field test. Even the deaths of his own teammates were acceptable losses. Deep beneath the mansion, Umbrella's greatest creation waited inside a massive containment chamber. They had finally succeeded, the T-002 Tyrant. Unlike ordinary zombies, the Tyrant retained intelligence. It could follow commands, use weapons, and adapt during combat. This was the future Umbrella intended to sell to the world's militaries. Wesker activated the containment system. As the Tyrant stepped forward, Wesker smiled. Years of research had all led to this moment. Then, everything went wrong. The Tyrant wasn't interested in following orders. Without warning, it drove its massive claw straight through Wesker's chest. The man who had betrayed everyone was betrayed himself. Or so it seemed. With the mansion collapsing around them, Chris, Jill, Barry, Rebecca fought their way back to the surface. Outside, Brad finally returned with the helicopter. As the Tyrant made one last attack, Brad dropped a rocket launcher onto the landing pad. One direct hit reduced Umbrella's ultimate weapon to burning flesh. Moments later, the mansion exploded. Chris believed everything was over. The laboratory had been destroyed. The monsters were dead. The evidence had been erased. Surely the nightmare had finally ended. Meanwhile, as the Spencer mansion burned, deep beneath Raccoon City, William Birkin was still alive. The T-virus was already spreading through the city's sewers, and in just 2 months, an entire city would cease to exist. September. Nearly 2 months had passed since the Spencer mansion incident. Officially, Umbrella denied everything. The company dismissed Chris Redfield and Jill Valentine's claims as nothing more than the delusions of traumatized police officers. The laboratories beneath the mansion had been destroyed, and without evidence, nobody believed them. No investigation was launched, and no arrests were made. Suddenly, patients with strange flu-like symptoms began arriving at hospitals. High fever, violent coughing, extreme fatigue. Doctors believed it was an unusually aggressive virus. Soon, patients started dying. Then minutes later, they stood back up. The city's hospitals became overwhelmed almost overnight. Police dispatch received thousands of emergency calls. Riots broke out across the city as entire neighbourhoods lost power. As more officers became infected, the Raccoon Police Department slowly lost control. Within days, Raccoon City had become a city of the dead. September 29, 1998, a rookie police officer named Leon S. Kennedy drove towards Raccoon City for his very first day on the job. He had been delayed after breaking up with his girlfriend, a decision that would accidentally save his life. Had he arrived one day earlier, he almost certainly would have died with everyone else. He entered the city just as civilization collapsed. At the same time, another young woman arrived, Claire Redfield.
Get down!
She had come searching for her older brother, Chris Redfield. Neither of them knew the city was already beyond saving. Separated shortly after entering town, Leon and Claire eventually found refuge inside the Raccoon Police Department, only to discover it had already fallen. The officers who once protected the city were now wandering its hallways. The station itself hid another secret. Long before becoming a police headquarters, the building had originally been constructed as an art museum. Hidden passages, ancient statues, underground tunnels. It almost resembled another Spencer mansion. Meanwhile, deep beneath the city, William Birkin continued mutating with every injury, forcing the G-virus to evolve even further. Yet, somewhere beneath the mutations, a single human emotion, one instinct remained: protect his daughter, Sherry Birkin. Umbrella had no intention of allowing survivors to expose the truth. To silence witnesses, the company deployed one of its newest bioweapons, the T-103 Tyrant. Better known by fans as Mr. X, unlike the Tyrant beneath Spencer Mansion, Mr. X wasn't an experimental prototype. He was a finished product engineered specifically for urban combat. His mission was brutally simple: eliminate every surviving witness, leave no evidence behind, and recover the G-virus. No matter where Leon or Claire escaped, Mr. X followed relentlessly. He never ran, and perhaps most terrifying of all, he couldn't be stopped. Elsewhere in Raccoon City, Jill Valentine had already been fighting for survival for nearly 24 hours. Ever since escaping Spencer Mansion, she had dedicated herself to exposing Umbrella. Now Umbrella had sent something specifically for her. Its name was Nemesis. Unlike previous tyrants, Nemesis could think and use weapons, track targets across an entire city. And unlike Mr. X, Nemesis had only one objective: kill every surviving member of STARS, one by one. As the city descended into chaos, Umbrella dispatched another team, professional soldiers called the Umbrella Biohazard Countermeasure Service, or UBCS for short. Among them is a mercenary named Carlos Oliveira. Most members believed they had been sent to rescue civilians. In reality, they had been sent to contain Umbrella's mistakes. Many never realized they were considered expendable from the very beginning. As September drew to a close, the United States government faced an impossible situation. Over 100,000 civilians remained trapped inside Raccoon City. The outbreak had spread beyond anything local authorities could contain, and there was only one option left. On October 1st, a tactical non-nuclear thermobaric missile was authorized against Raccoon City. The explosion erased nearly everything. Officially, Raccoon City ceased to exist, and the disaster was blamed on a catastrophic industrial accident, with the truth remaining classified. Leon survived, Claire survived, Sherry survived, Jill survived, Carlos survived. But survival didn't mean victory. Over 100,000 people had died, as an entire city had vanished from the map. For the first time, governments around the world began asking a dangerous question: who created the virus? And every investigation eventually pointed to the same company, Umbrella. For years, the corporation had operated in the shadows. After Raccoon City, the entire world was finally watching. News organizations began asking difficult questions. How had a pharmaceutical company become connected to a citywide biological disaster? Where had these creatures come from? Who created the virus? Recognizing Leon's experience in fighting bioorganic weapons, the US government offered him a choice: work for us or watch Sherry Birkin disappear into government custody. With little choice, Leon accepted. Over the following years, he underwent intensive military and intelligence training, transforming from a rookie police officer into one of the government's most elite special agents. Not long after, government investigations quickly expanded beyond Raccoon City. Leon sent private investigator Ark Thompson to infiltrate Umbrella's Sheena Island facility. He uncovered abandoned Umbrella laboratories, secret testing facilities, illegal human experiments, hidden military contracts. The corporation that had spent decades presenting itself as a trusted healthcare company was suddenly being investigated as the largest bioweapons manufacturer on Earth. Its reputation collapsed almost overnight. Most people believe Raccoon City marked the end of the nightmare, but Chris Redfield didn't. After surviving the Spencer Mansion incident, he left Raccoon City on vacation to investigate Umbrella's overseas bases. He knew Umbrella still existed as long as Spencer remained alive. Chris dedicated his life to destroying Umbrella. His investigation eventually led him to Europe. There, he discovered something unexpected. His younger sister Claire had disappeared. After escaping Raccoon City, Claire had only one goal: find Chris. Following rumours of Umbrella facilities across Europe, she eventually arrived in Paris. Unfortunately, Umbrella found her first. She was captured and transported to a remote prison island, Rockfort Island, an isolated military base owned entirely by Umbrella. Claire had escaped one nightmare only to walk directly into another. Rockfort Island wasn't just another Umbrella facility. It belonged to one of the three families that had founded the company decades earlier, the Ashfords. Edward Ashford had helped create Umbrella, alongside Spencer and Marcus. But over the years, the once powerful Ashford family had slowly faded into obscurity. One member desperately wanted to restore its former glory: Alfred Ashford, the island's commander. A man whose unstable mind reflected the decades of tragedy that had consumed his family. Living alongside him, or so everyone believed, was his twin sister, Alexia Ashford, the brilliant scientist responsible for some of Umbrella's most advanced virus research. Except there was one problem. Alexia hadn't been seen for years, because the person Alfred constantly spoke to wasn't actually there. Before Claire could escape, Rockfort Island came under attack, not by governments and terrorists, but by a single man, Albert Wesker. Everyone believed Wesker had died beneath the Spencer Mansion. The tyrant had impaled him, and the laboratory exploded. There should have been no possible way to survive, and yet there he was, alive, stronger and faster. He is no longer entirely human. Unknown to almost everyone, Wesker had secretly injected himself with an experimental virus before the mansion incident. The tyrant hadn't killed him. Instead, it had activated the virus. Now Wesker possessed abilities far beyond ordinary humans. He no longer worked for Umbrella and had his own ambitions. And he had come to Rockfort Island for one reason: Alexia's research. Learning that Claire had been captured, Chris crossed Europe searching for her. Eventually, he arrived on Rockfort Island. For the first time, the Redfield siblings fought side by side together. They survived another Umbrella outbreak, defeated Alfred Ashford, confronted Alexia, who has been deep in a cryostatic stasis pod so her body could safely adapt to the T-Veronica virus, and the Redfield siblings eventually escaped the island alive. But the battle wasn't over, because somewhere else, Albert Wesker was already planning his next move. By the early 2000s, Umbrella was collapsing. One disaster after another had destroyed its reputation: the Spencer Mansion, Raccoon City, Rockfort Island. Each outbreak exposed another piece of the company's secrets. Governments severed contracts as research facilities were shut down across the world. Ironically, Umbrella's greatest invention was no longer the T-virus. It was the black market. Because once bioweapons existed, every terrorist organization, Every rogue government and every criminal syndicate wanted them. The company had opened a door that humanity could never fully close. Hidden away in one of his European estates, Oswell Spencer watched everything unfold. The lawsuits, the bankruptcies, the investigations, the collapse of the empire he had spent 40 years building. Most people would have accepted defeat, but Spencer didn't. To him, Umbrella had only ever been a tool, a stepping stone towards immortality. If the corporation had to die for his dream to survive, so be it. He simply needed someone capable of carrying it forward, and he already knew exactly who that person was. Albert Wesker. In March 2003, Umbrella officially declared bankruptcy. For Chris Redfield, bankruptcy wasn't justice. A company couldn't simply file paperwork and erase everything it had done. Millions had suffered because of Umbrella. Someone still had to answer for it. Together with Jill Valentine, Chris joined a newly formed anti-bioterror organization. Their mission wasn't to investigate crimes anymore. It was to hunt down the people who caused them. And there was one name that remained at the very top of the list: Oswell E. Spencer. Intelligence reports eventually led Chris and Jill to one final Umbrella stronghold. Hidden deep within the Caucasus Mountains of Russia, the company had constructed one last enormous research facility. It wasn't just another laboratory, it was Umbrella's final headquarters. Chris and Jill fought their way through the facility. Laboratory after laboratory, storage vault after storage vault. Scientists hurriedly destroyed documents as computer servers were wiped clean. Specimens were abandoned inside containment chambers as employees fled. Deep beneath the facility, Chris and Jill finally confronted the Talos, short for Tyrant Armored Lethal Organic System. In many ways, the Talos represented everything Umbrella had been trying to build since James Marcus first created the T-Virus, the perfect bioorganic weapon. It was stronger than every Tyrant before it. The battle was brutal, but this time Umbrella no longer had unlimited resources. No second chance. When the Talos finally fell, so did everything Umbrella had spent decades creating. Moments later, explosions ripped through the underground complex. The final Umbrella laboratory had collapsed into the mountains, buried beneath thousands of tons of rock. For the first time in decades, there were no more Umbrella facilities. News broadcasts around the world celebrated Umbrella's collapse. Its logo disappeared from hospitals. Its offices closed forever. Its laboratories were seized. For millions of people, justice had finally been served. Chris Redfield looked toward the future. Jill Valentine believed the nightmare had finally ended. The world believed bioterrorism had died alongside Umbrella. But they were wrong, because knowledge doesn't disappear. And once mankind learns how to create monsters, someone else will always try again. A remote village in northern Spain, a police vehicle slowly drives along a narrow dirt road. Inside sits a government agent. His name, Leon S. Kennedy. His objective, rescue the kidnapped daughter of the President of the United States. Elsewhere, a familiar figure watches from the shadows, Albert Wesker. He opens a classified report. Across the front are two words, Las Plagas. Umbrella was dead, but the age of bioterror had only just begun.